and thanks everyone, particularly to the speakers who have come before me, because I think they've done a really good job of setting the scene about what the program was, explaining that kind of high level foresight work and the big picture for how we're working in the EGP, as well as, looking at an example of a farming system technology in SRFSI that can address some of those challenges. And then, as Lynn has mentioned, some of the institutional work. So in this final presentation, we're going to show some of the additional work that's been done to support the program's work by filling research gaps and taking opportunities where they've arisen. So the focus on these additional studies has been, there have been 5 key themes. One is context, but Avinash has covered that really well. The other is in conservation agriculture and some of the potential risks and constraints there in terms of scaling mechanisation, groundwater, and knowledge sharing mechanisms. And I think you can see a common theme, with all the presentations today that have shared these elements at different levels. So you don't need to look at this in detail, but this is just to show that there were 13 projects of varying sizes that have contributed to this work. And so this presentation will provide some of the snapshot of the work that's been undertaken. So in terms of the potential constraints, in terms of implementing and scaling CASI, in a review of SRFSI in 2018, there were some potential constraints to CASI implementation at scale identified. Things like soil health, changing weeds, pests and diseases, water management and agronomic management. And so several projects have been implemented to explore these different constraints. So in terms of soil constraints, this work has been done by the University of Queensland. So they have highlighted a couple of big potential issues in terms of soil constraints in the Eastern Gangetic Plains. One is in terms of soil degradation through acidification, which is a risk to agricultural productivity. And the EGP has soils that are susceptible to acidification with productive agricultural systems, high rates of ammonium nitrogen fertiliser that are applied but not always well utilised by the crop, and substantial yield removed. So there is an expectation that these systems can acidify, and in the graph on the right you can see the relationship between initial soil pH and the time that it might take to get to very highly acidic soils. And in some cases that's as low as 4 up to say 10 to 12 years. One caveat here is that the modelling doesn't incorporate the impacts of adding alkaline groundwater, so that's another element that needs to be explored. The other major issue across the EGP is zinc deficiency, which is the part of their study was really just in confirming that it is widespread and it really just needs a targeted extension approach. So there's some potential constraint or existing and then potential constraints that need to be kind of monitored in terms of soils. Another one of the potential risks in terms of constraints in terms of conservation agriculture systems is in weed management. That's often identified as an issue once people start implementing CA. So CIMMYT undertook a study to look at whether weed dynamics were changing and how that impacted labour, in particular for women. So we can see that the table here shows considerable, this was with the implementation of zero-till, substantial time savings in India and Nepal for both men and women. And in Bangladesh, weeding labour is already very low, so there's not as much of a change. The weed management aligns with reduced time, and they didn't find any reallocation of roles or burden where herbicides are used, as they commonly are in the Eastern Gangetic Plains. And they didn't identify any change in weed dynamics yet in the established CASI systems. A substantial piece of work has been done in terms of sustainable groundwater development, and the work has centred around 3 main themes. That includes understanding access and availability of groundwater, options for local water management, both in terms of farming practices like CASI that reduce water use at the farm level, and testing managed aquifer recharge in Bihar, and exploring the impacts of common policy instruments. And this work really builds on the work that was done in the early phases of SRFSI in terms of looking at water availability in the different districts where the project operated, as well as some work on water markets. And what it's done is allow a deeper understanding of the groundwater system, recognising that 90% of farmers that irrigate use groundwater resources. And Lynn's already covered some of that in his presentation. But recently, there's 5 projects got together, and we came up with some common messages from the work. So I'm presenting those combined messages. So the first is in terms of understanding the links between local and regional hydrology. So the map on the left shows locations where some of the analysis was done across the East Indo-Gangetic Plains. And you can see that groundwater resources are in general underexploited in the Eastern Gangetic Plains. So in the graph on the right, as you move from west to east across the IGP and into the Eastern Gangetic Plains, you can see that groundwater is commonly underexploited. So there can be room for development. But there is also variation in district level groundwater use, even though at a state or regional level, the system is in balance. And you don't need to look at these graphs in detail, but just to note that this is 7 different districts, both in India and Bangladesh. Graphs are in a west to east order from top to bottom and showing the difference in groundwater levels. So we can see that some locations have seasonal decline in groundwater levels, which is important to monitor because we need to know whether that seasonal decline is compensated by recharge in the wet season. And it means that we need a suite of management options and policies that you can apply at a local level to address the local challenges. And so we know that there's multiple studies have confirmed that groundwater is abundant and extractions can increase, but it doesn't take long necessarily for that to change. And so monitoring is definitely important. The second message is that misconceptions about what causes groundwater decline. There's a misconception that when groundwater is used for irrigation, everything that's pumped is lost, which is actually not true in a place like the Eastern Gangetic Plains, which has shallow groundwater of good quality. So water that's not used by plants contributes to recharge and can be used by others in the system. So the true loss from the system is in evapotranspiration. So reducing farm level water use only does not reduce evapotranspiration necessarily, and hence water use at a regional scale. So to save water, you need to reduce ET by changing cropping patterns or crop duration. And there's been some interesting work done by CSIRO in terms of looking at which crop combinations and management options can help to reduce ET. So in the northwest of Bangladesh, groundwater decline is a concern, and there are some policies that encourage farm level water savings to halt the groundwater decline. But given that there are multiple causes of groundwater decline that are both on and off farm, we need to know what causes the decline in specific locations, because if we just make policies that focus on on-farm solutions, they'll have very little value if the decline is actually driven by off-farm factors. Lynn talked a little bit earlier about improving access to pumps. We know that informal private rental markets play a major role in ensuring irrigation access for most farmers in the Eastern Gangetic Plains. And in a survey in SRFSI by IFPRI, they found that about 75% of people were renting pumps to access irrigation, and water buyers were often smaller and poorer farmers. So water users are not all the same, and one policy won't work in the same way for everyone. So subsidising pump ownership in traditional ways benefits people who traditionally own pumps, which is men and larger farmers, but doesn't necessarily mean that women or tenant farmers will get as much gain from that. And you can see on the right there a graph from Sophie Lountain in Lynn's project that shows the preferences of farmers for different pump characteristics, which differs between gender. So if you target support, better targeting of support could produce multiple benefits. If you subsidise access, for example, to pumping technologies to people who were more likely to sell water into markets. You might create, you know, you create more supply in terms of the water market. Another important consideration in the EGP is the changing irrigation energy nexus. So we obviously know that irrigation and energy are really tightly coupled in this region. And we know that that is changing as access to electricity and solar power and diesel is changing. So a study by IMI last year looked at what the expected results, or this diagram shows the expected results from making electricity easier to access. But they looked at large-scale electrification in West Bengal over the last decade, and it has not actually led to, most farmers have not increased the amount of crops they grow, particularly burro rice, and they haven't changed the kind of crops they grow either. Although in some district levels there were impacts in places that didn't have access to electricity before that. So if we know that grid electrification is happening in the EGP, but we don't really understand what the impacts are, we need to know what tariffs and power supply arrangements can improve agricultural development, and then what impact that can have on local and regional hydrology. The last message about water is that water alone is not enough. So groundwater access and the constraints around the access are contingent on the other resources that are also available to water users. And it's been shown in multiple studies that improving access to water alone is not enough. So farmers also need access to inputs, stable output prices, better market infrastructure to improve productivity and profitability. And those results have been identified in multiple studies based on both qualitative and quantitative data. So it seems that there is limits to the traditional ways of promoting groundwater development, and water and energy policies will need to be made in collaboration with agriculture and food if they're going to be successful in sustainably increasing food production among farmers and maintaining groundwater resources. So I think what this package of work has done has really let us have a much more nuanced understanding of the groundwater system in the Eastern Gangetic Plain, but there's by no means, it's by no means finished. I would say it's the tip of the iceberg. Another major focus of other projects in this space has been in terms of scaling mechanisation. So we've heard a little bit before from Brendan in SRFSI about the scaling in SRFSI. Obviously, you can't have conservation agriculture successfully without machine availability. So one of the drivers is in learning how we can scale mechanisation. And this work capitalised on existing ACR investments in mechanisation, including on the Happy Seeder in India, which was a project undertaken by the University of Adelaide, and then also the versatile multi-crop planter in Bangladesh. And I'm hoping that my technology works and that Richard will now explain or describe his experiences with the VMP in Bangladesh.
I'd like to share with you key lessons learned from the commercialisation of the versatile multi-crop planter. The planter is shown in the slide on the right-hand side. It's a device that is attached to a two-wheel tractor that's able to sow seeds of varying sizes from as small as sesame and jute all the way up to large seeds such as peanut. This commercialisation has been led by Dr. Inamul Haq, Adjunct Associate Professor of Murdoch University, together with Mijanul Haq, the Managing Director of the Haq Corporation, who have been the commercial partner. In brief, our experimentation with commercialisation suggests that a planting incentive model is most successful and could be recommended for wider outscaling of the VMP. The planting incentive model pays a bonus to purchasers of the VMP to incentivise them to find farmers who are willing to undertake their service and to build a client base and to build their own confidence in being able to carry out high quality planting services. But with all commercialisation, which is a large experiment in an uncertain world, there are important learnings from the experience we've gained. Firstly, that the non-rice crops are the most prospective and the crops for which there's the greatest initial business potential. So areas where diversified Rabi season cropping exists are the areas of greatest promise for promoting the VMP and commercialising the technology. The second learning has been that experienced operators are critically important for the success of planting, especially in the initial stages. But when operators become trained, there's an expectation that they will have year-round job assurance, and currently the planting seasons are limited to a few months of the year, and that means that there's been a large turnover of operators. We have found that there are more business models for VMP operators than we had expected. And the one that surprised us most is that about 25% of sales have gone to farmers who are only interested in planting their own crops and not in providing service to anyone else. Finally, the cost involved in developing new markets and commercialising the VMP will require significant co-investment of the private sector partners to assist with promotion and demonstration of the technology, with marketing, with training of operators and other supply chain agents, as well as providing after-sales service. Thank you.
Thanks to Richard for that little input. So I think just drawing on some maybe quite obvious but high-level lessons from the different elements of scaling that have been undertaken in SDIP is that you need to engage and work with a range of stakeholders, including the private sector and different government agencies. Their groups continue to provide opportunities that individual farmers cannot capitalise on. And then there are that effective field and policy links can result in convergence. So the final piece of work or theme I'd like to talk about is knowledge sharing mechanisms. So we'll hear from two different projects that are looking at different knowledge sharing mechanisms, and those are country specific in Bangladesh and Nepal. And it responds to opportunities that have come out of other partnerships and the foresight work.
Hello everyone, my name's Serena McFadgen. I'm from CSIRO in Canberra, and I'm working on a project with a team at the Bangladesh Agricultural University, led by Nahid Sattar. And we're interested in trying to understand more about how the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture's Farmers Hub initiative is being used to scale out agricultural innovations and technologies in a couple of sites in Bangladesh. What these Farmers Hubs are supposed to do is provide a one-stop commercial service platform for smallholder farmers in Bangladesh, and they create access or provide access to various agricultural inputs, services like seedlings and farm machinery, linkages to markets, and access to information and knowledge about cultivation. This diagram shows how the Farmers Hubs connect farmers with research, extension and market agents. The flow of information or advice is illustrated as the dotted line, and the flow of services is illustrated as the solid lines. This figure has been designed on the basis of our learning and experience during the scoping trips that were conducted at the start of our project, participant observations and expert interviews. During the scoping trip, we learned that the Farmers Hubs buy cocoa peat media, plastic trays and farm machinery from network managers. They buy seedlings from different sources based on the recommendations of the Syngenta Foundation Research and Development Team, and this is passed through the network managers. Some of the hubs buy output from farmers and sell to distant markets, and some of them also help smallholder farmers make linkages with really distant buyers. So we conducted a quantitative survey that focused on 6 focal hubs within Bangladesh, And we interviewed over about 320 people that were both participants of the hub and also non-participants that were present in the same region. We got a lot of data and information from this survey, but here we focus on one result that looks at the type of information or advice that flows through the hub. So we know there are a diversity of sources for agricultural information that any one farmer may access. And as part of our survey, we mapped which types of information are being provided by the hub and which types are being provided by other information sources. So that's things like family and friends, peer-to-peer through other farmers, from sellers and traders, and also through extension agents. On the bottom graph, you can see that the grey bars represent the information that was delivered through the hubs. And I focused just on the common information that was provided by the hubs. So that's the information on the choice of crop type, the choice of crop variety, fertiliser use practices, and pesticide use practices. I included weather in this graph, just an example, as the only information type where mass media played a significant role, which is the dark blue box. So that's things like newspaper and television. And we think there may be an opportunity to use hubs more to distribute agricultural practice change information or help the scale out of agricultural practice change in a more strategic manner. Whereas for non-participants of the hubs, you might use a different type of information channel, perhaps through extension agents. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks to Serena and Mahid for that interjection. So the final case study really is from Nepal, which brings together, I guess, some work from the Foresight work in Nepal, but then also work. So the first thing that was done as part of the Foresight group was understanding food systems and the context of the changing federal system in Nepal, which was identified obviously as a major driver of food systems currently. And then within SRFSI, there was testing farm level interventions. And finally, there's been a pilot approach, a pilot project developed by Madhav Karki and his team to improve planning and coordination for knowledge development and access. And then CIMMYT have also worked at a provincial level in the Roadmaps project to help improve planning and coordination for mechanisation. So I think that's a really good example of how we, the activities within the Foresight group, our Foresight work, were used to identify key opportunities. And then we could, because we had the kind of flexibility within the program, we had funds that we could develop the small pilot project to try and address some of those opportunities. So Madhav now will just give a quick summary of the work that they're doing in Nepal.
Hello everyone, I'm reporting preliminary findings of a participatory action research my team is conducting in Province 2, Nepal. The main research question is what knowledge transfer mechanism can deliver the service in an efficient and effective manner. To find answer, we have conducted 2 stakeholder consultations involving local and government leaders, technicians, and province level senior agriculture officers, scientists from NAR centers located in the province, and experts from Federal Department of Agriculture. We have also conducted farm household level survey involving 146 farmers and collected their perspectives. The major findings from our research are, from government perspective, number 1, unclear roles and responsibilities of both local and provincial government, although agriculture is mainly their joint responsibility. Number 2, there is poor human, institutional, and systemic capacity across the government agencies, especially in agriculture knowledge centers. From farmers' perspective, the key issues and challenges faced by them are, number 1, poor access to technical know-how and inputs such as hybrid seeds and planting and crop management methods. Number 2, the availability of government-provided extension service is negligible, and the local expert farmers are therefore the main source of information for farmers. Number 3, the priority requirements of most farmers are irrigation, fertilizer, seeds, and plant protection materials, especially for commercialization of farming. Based on our research findings, there are three major recommendations. Number one, clarify the role and responsibilities of the agriculture knowledge centers. Number two, build capacity of AKCs to function as knowledge resource centers, technology assessment and capacity building agency, and knowledge and technology transfer platform. Number three, provincial government should provide adequate financial and human resources to the AKCs, and local government should develop collaboration with AKCs to strengthen their agriculture service centers. Thank you very much.
Thanks to Marta for his inputs. So just in conclusion, I think what we've demonstrated is a range of work that kind of sits alongside some of the other work that's been done in the program. And key contributions from these pieces of work include that some resource constraints we can predict, such as acidification, climate change, water. We need to anticipate and manage for them. And that fits in obviously with the foresight narrative too, in terms of, you know, taking a bigger picture and view of what's coming. Groundwater is the basis of EGP farming systems and will become increasingly so with climate change. And we need to understand the multiple pressures and manage in an integrated way so appropriate policies can respond to local situations, because we can see that there is a lot of local variability. Mechanisation is essential to CASI scaling, and there's valuable lessons from the work that's been done that we can help support CA, and also principles that we can test more generally for scaling. And then dissemination and access to knowledge across all parts of the program. So exploring how knowledge flows and connections that can help this happen more effectively are key to any progress. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions, but we also have the partners who have done the research on the meeting as well. So if there's technical questions, we can defer to them.